Depending on your outlook in life, looking at this immaculate, completely standard Nissan 200SX S14a will either elicit memories of dreary late 90s repmobile car culture or feelings of awe, having spotted a prominent sibling of the 1990s JDM performance car family.
Personally, I'm very much in the latter camp. This, to me, is a millennial Sierra Cosworth, a bona fide blue-collar legend, rowdy, turbocharged and lightweight. This rear-wheel drive coupe is an analog machine for the PlayStation generation.
I also see an absolute unicorn. For those of you who followed the rear-wheel drive Japanese sports car market for a while, you'll know that finding a low-owner, low-mileage Nissan 200SX is like finding a restaurant in London that still serves normal-sized plates.
Most of these cars have been modified beyond recognition, smashed into Armco, or broken for parts after the shells have rusted beyond repair. I know that because unfortunately I've done most of those things myself. As a result, the once accessible, affordable sports car for the everyman has turned into something of a collectible legend. I mean, really and truly, when's the last time you saw a 200SX on the roads?
In the last few years, values of these 200SXs have tripled. People are finally catching on to how good they are and how special this era of Japanese sports cars truly were, and rightly so. If you're looking to get a slice of the action, this one's coming to market on shootingbrake.com. Set with an attractive reserve, a few clicks could bring the certified icon onto your driveway. Before you do that, however, you'll probably want to see what it's like to drive.
So, got a Nissan 200SX S14a. For the uninitiated, the 200SX is the European nameplate for the Nissan Silvia. And the Nissan Silvia is a name commonly associated with rear-wheel drive, four-seater, lightweight, sporty but usable coupes. They sit below the Skyline in the Nissan lineup and have always had four-cylinder engines as opposed to six. So in the context of Nissan sports car lineup, you had the Skyline, the Fair Lady, and the Silvia. You also had a bunch of other saloons which shared engines like the with the SR20 Det and the RB25 and all that kind of stuff. But that was the three sports car family, and the Silvia was the lightest, most usable one. Think of it as the 3 Series in Nissan's lineup. Now, when this car was released in the UK, it was released and marketed to compete with the E36 328. And the E36 328 was about 28 grand. You could get one of these for 20. It had more power, it was lighter, had a better 0 to 60. It came with leather and a 6CD changer for that listed retail price. So it was an absolute bargain at the time. But Nissan didn't market this as an out-and-out sports car. They marketed it as a GT. They gave the UK cars a longer final drive with a diff cooler because they wanted it to be able to cruise at high speed for a long time, and they wanted the car to come across as a sort of more luxurious, more comfortable, more daily-able kind of car. But underneath is bona fide sports car. We've got a 1300 kilo chassis, limited slip diff, a really sophisticated multi-link rear suspension, and little things, a really quick steering rack. You sit very low, the belt line of the car is very low, the visibility is great. The engine's super torquey, turbocharged. It's an SR20 Det, which is a 2-litre 16-valve twin-cam 4-cylinder engine with a T28 turbocharger. It makes about 200 brake on very, very conservative boost figures. Most people turn the wick up to about a bar and you get about 250, 260 at that point. But this one's completely standard. Completely standard. It's not even got an aftermarket exhaust or airbox, which is quite remarkable because most of these end up with those modifications just because the local garage sticks them on because they're cheaper than OEM parts. But this car, having only done 58,000 miles, presents as completely standard. So let's talk about this gearbox. We've got an automatic gearbox here, which isn't most people's first choice, right? Especially on a 200SX. Now the fact is, most of the manuals have disappeared. Reason being, these cars are super popular for tuning, drifting, track days, you name it. They're an amazing platform to modify, to build. They've got a great chassis, really tunable engine. You know, why would you not? But fact is, manual's just non-existent. And on top of that, if you get a manual, car's typically going to be in a lot worse condition because of the way it's been used. And also on top of that, the auto gearbox in these does quite a good job of protecting the engine. doesn't kick down unless you ask it to. It's generally going to keep the revs low, and generally if you buy an automatic car, automatic 200SX rather, you're going to know that it's been treated fairly well just because of the typical use case and buyer profile of these cars when they were new. Now, where does that leave us now in 2023 with this car being effectively a modern classic and a collectible, Japanese icon? Fact is, this car's on 58,000 miles. It's a two-owner car. Whether or not it's automatic is, I don't think it really impacts the use case of this car, which is basically Sunday drives, give it polish, take it to meets, and keep it as part of a brilliant collection of modern classic Japanese curio cars or Japanese sports cars or 90s sports cars. You might have an E36 328 Sport or an M3, and you have this as part of that collection. On top of that, it's genuinely not a bad box. So it's not going to kick down in corners, fine, but it's very responsive. We've got a really nice tight torque converter on this one. The ratios are great, very snappy. The automatics had a 3.9 final drive as opposed to the 3.6 on the manuals, so they are quite peppy. On top of that, with the car being turbocharged and very torquey, the boost kicks in around 2,500 RPM on this, and that's just about when the automatic gearbox ratios kind of feed into one another. So you're always on boost. As a result, if you want to overtake someone, say you're doing a Euro trip or you're doing a trip to Wales or Scotland and you're on an A road and you need to overtake, the kickdown's there and you're off. It's absolutely brilliant. I genuinely thought I would hate this gearbox. I love S14s, I love 200SX, I've had 200SXs, I've had a fair few myself. I thought I'd hate this gearbox, but I genuinely don't. On a nice standard car like this, it's really useful and it's actually genuinely quite fun. On top of that, if you want to have a bit of fun on a roundabout and do the old school 200SX things, you can lock it into second and it will do its thing. I'm not going to demonstrate that to you here on a two-owner 58,000 mile car, but I'm sure if you buy this and bid, you can find out for yourself. So we're just coming out of a 30 here, cruising along. There's no mode, no sport mode, nothing like that, no Tiptronic. Foot down, kip down, and we're off. And that's 60 there. It just keeps on pulling. The way this thing goes to just past 6.5, it's unreal. The boost stays in all the way through. It's a real driver's car engine. It's still got that old school turbocharged lag, which makes it quite exciting. But it's not done by 5k like a lot of modern cars are. It pulls all the way through. That T28 turbo is slightly oversized for a 2-litre engine, which makes for a really very old school, analog, tactile driving experience. But at the same time, you don't need to think about it too much. Realistically, you're going to spend most of your time between 2 and 6k. The gearbox is really nicely calibrated for that. It's not going to kick down unless you ask it to, but it does a really good job of keeping the car within the ideal power band. And then on a cruise, you're sitting, I believe, just below 3k, which is decent enough. Could happily go to Europe in one of these. You've got nice usable back seats as well. Not the biggest of boots, but back seat, you can get 2 adults in there or some suitcases or whatnot. Again, this is a Japanese 3 Series, except it's a genuine sports car chassis. In the same way that BMW made the 3 Series, then they made the Z3, and the Z3 is a saloon-derived sports car. This is a sports car derived coupe. The actual architecture of the car underneath, it's just purely designed for driving. They've just added, the leather, the CD changer, and a bit of sound deadening on top to make the car more usable. But you notice it's a sports car from the second you get in it. The seats are bolted straight to the floor. My legs are just stretched out in front of me. I'm sitting in the car, not on it, even on these standard seats. It's brilliant. You can tell what they set the car up for in Japan. Right, so you've got a lovely set of corners here. Let's see what this thing can do with an auto gearbox. So feed in the power, nice 4-pot brakes on these, vented discs, and a viscous limited slip diff. We're sitting on Pirelli tyres here. You don't really end up using that diff much in the dry because it's got a fair bit of mechanical grip and some decent tyres. But really nice chassis, really balanced, super neutral. Power's there when you need it to get you out of trouble. And then the brakes, really good for standard brakes. A lot of people put these on coilovers. Standard suspension, you know, it's not amazing, but it's decent. It's not boaty either. Again, you can tell it's got a sports car ethos behind it. It pitches and dives a little bit, but it tells you what's going on. I quite like that for road use. And you'd lose a lot of that feel if you actually put this on coilovers for the road. So let's break it down piece by piece. The steering, it's got really good on-center feel. There's no dead zone. Fairly quick rack, very direct. It's not a variable ratio rack or anything like that. There's not much feel, as is typical with Japanese sports cars. It's got quite light steering and not a huge amount of feel. But the chassis is telling you what's going on, so it doesn't really matter too much. And you know, it's not completely dead like an electronic power steering system is. It's just not on par with you know, like a Porsche or an E36 BMW or something like that. But nice and quick and direct. The brakes, very strong. You'd struggle to get these to fade. We've only got 1,300 kilos to deal with here. Brakes are fairly overkill for what they are. And a decent set of pads and fluid goes a long way in these. Engine, as we said, SR20 DET, 2 litre 16 valve turbo. Super torquey, pulls hard, more than enough power for this chassis. Feels like a bit of a hot rod, to be honest. You wouldn't get this sort of power to weight to grip from one of the European manufacturers. It's quite a Larry car, to be honest, especially in the wet. And we've got no traction control. I think the only driver's assistance we have is ABS, but no traction control, no stability control. It's just you, throttle pedal, brake pedal, steering wheel, and that's it. Chassis itself, beautifully balanced. Honestly, this chassis is on par with something that, in my opinion, that Porsche would create. You know, this is basically a modern day successor to the Porsche 944, in my opinion. I think these chassis are they're just unreal the way they're set up. On the limit, you don't get understeer, you just get the car floating into a kind of four-wheel, you know, not a slide, but just where you feel the limit of the grip, and you feel the grip slowly kind of getting lost down the side of the car. In the current motoring landscape, where, you know, pretty much the only thing you can get is a GR86 on par with this, I think that's great. You know, it's just you have to think about driving. You have to actually concentrate, and you actually have to, you know, use your skill as a driver to get the best out of this car, which, in my opinion, is what it's all about. It doesn't do anything for you. So, I've had a few 200SXs. I've had 3 S14s and 4 S13s, and an R32 Skyline, which is similar underpinnings. They've got McPherson strut, front suspension, but very similar rear subframe, and they drive, you know, fairly similarly. And honestly, you know, I'm lucky enough to have driven some nice cars, but the 200SX is my first love when it comes to cars. It's just everything that I personally want from a car. It's rear-wheel drive, it's usable, it's light, it's tunable, it's right straight out of the box. You don't get in this and think, oh, I wish I could change this and change that. You know, the fundamental parts of the car are what you want. And I just think they look great. Really handsome proportions. The S14a is typically held up as being the most attractive 200SX. Ultimately, it comes down to your style. Do you like more aggressive cars? Do you like more elegant cars? S14a has a very aggressive, chiseled front jaw, and it's got that really cool straight rear light, which I love. And the roof line on these is super low. The whole car just sits super low. So good. And tell you what, with the automatic gearbox, you get to keep both hands on the wheel, which is pretty handy. If this was NA, you know, with a peaky, revvy engine, then you would hate this in auto. But with a turbocharged engine, it's a very modern format. You know, this is basically the equivalent to a BMW 435i coupe or something. It's got this turbocharged, torquey GT cruiser that when the going gets tough, it can hack it. Lean on the brakes, get the nose in, and just step on it. That is brilliant. such a nice size for English roads as well. It's not too wide, it's not too big. You can really get some good pace on. Oh, this thing is brilliant and brings like so many memories of driving these when I was at uni, and I just, honestly, there's very few things that have come close to the level of engagement and poise that these cars offer. And to be honest, the first car I've had since that has offered the same level of engagement and driving fun that I've had is my 996 Carrera. That is the first car I've had where I feel like I'm getting the same level of driving enjoyment that I did from my S14 200SX. And that's high praise. It really, really is, because that 996, that's a brilliant car. I absolutely love that thing. Now, prices on these have tripled in the last couple of years, and a lot of people complaining that they're not accessible anymore. And you know, truth be told, they're not, and that's a real shame. At the same time, I think that speaks more for the fact that these cars were criminally undervalued for so long. The fact is, even at 10 to 15 grand that these cars go for, it's still a great proposition from a performance point of view, because the kind of cars you can buy for that money, they're not that much better than this. They genuinely really aren't, especially with a bit of fettling. If I understand it's only got 200 brake, but you know, many people go to, you know, they call it stage one, where you get a bar boost, a front mount intercooler, some coilovers. At that point, you're pushing around 250, 260 brake in a 1300 kilo car, and on the road, they're just spot on. You know, I mean, that's the same formula that the GR6 follows at 30 grand. It's basically this. It's a modern day version of this. I think that makes this car a performance bargain, honestly, even at the current prices. Now, the other thing is, I know it's a cliche, but you simply won't find another one like this. I've been in the market for one of these for years. So probably a best part of a decade now. And, you know, 10 years ago, these cars were a lot cheaper, and even then, and they're a lot more common as well, and even then it was impossible to find one with 58,000 miles and 2 owners. This car's even got the dealer stickers. It's got all the standard stickers in the engine bay. It's just, I mean, finding something like that is like finding an RS2000 Mark II Escort completely original. That's what this car is to people of my generation who are into Japanese cars. It is just an absolute unicorn. Absolute unicorn. It's an absolute privilege to be able to drive this car, having lusted after them for 10 years, to be able to see one in this condition. This is basically presents as new. It's even got the standard radio. I mean, you just don't see that. And then the exhaust on these, most of the time they've got really weird pattern exhaust back box. And because of that, or people go for a big can because it's cheaper than getting an OEM system. This car's got the OEM system with the OEM cat. I mean, that's just unbelievable, genuinely unbelievable. And it could be yours with a couple of clicks on shootingbrake.com. This is the exact kind of car that we love to have on the platform. It's a gem, it's a unicorn, it's driver focused, and if you know, you know. And if you're watching this, then I assume you do know. If you fancy getting behind the wheel of a Japanese icon, head on over to shootingbrake.com, where you can bid, browse and sell. This Nissan 200SX S14a will be soon coming to the site on auction, and after a couple clicks, it could be yours.
Make sure to keep an eye out on our channel for more videos about the cars that you love. We've got some pretty tasty stuff coming up, and if you don't want to miss out, well, I'm sure you know what to do.